Continuing my series looking at the Marvel Famous Covers line from Toy Biz, in this video I'm going to turn my attention to another set of Avengers, the Scarlet Witch and the Vision. So I'll start off with the Scarlet Witch, and as ever we'll look at the packaging first. This is of course consistent with the rest of the packaging designs across the entire line. I'm a huge fan of it, as you'll probably know by now if you've seen any of the other videos in this series, but I think the overall presentation is really colourful. It's very nicely illustrated, fantastic image of Wanda there, and I think they've done a very nice job of that glowing Avengers symbol, the big A in those sort of hex vision that Wanda's created. Looks really nice, very consistent with the character, and yeah, the presentation is really well done. Now, interestingly, the famous cover they've opted for is Avengers number 186, which I suppose does have the Scarlet Witch up front and centre. It's probably not the cover that I would have chosen. It's not the one that immediately springs to mind for me. I suppose it's all down to personal opinion, but for me, covers like 171 or number 113 are just a lot more dramatic, a lot more memorable. The colours and the composition is just a lot more interesting for me personally, so these are the ones that tend to stick in my mind a lot more when I think of the Scarlet Witch in this particular costume, but nevertheless, it's still a solid choice. Obviously, Wanda is centre of this cover and has it all to herself, so I think that is a fair call to make. As usual, on the side panel we have that nice chunky logo of the character, and we have that wonderful illustrated image of the character. This is quite dynamic. When you put these boxes together, you have a nice display to line these up on a shelf, say. But the other key thing to notice about this particular box is that it's much chunkier than any of the others in this series. And that has everything to do with the way they've decided to style her hair, and we'll touch on that in a moment. Meanwhile, on the reverse of the packaging, we have again that fantastic image, that illustrated image of the character, much larger this time, and again, very presentable, very displayable, looks very nice. And of course, we have the gatefold flap there, so we can open that up. We have those images that we've seen on the front and the side of the packaging. We have a little bit of bio about the character, very nicely presented on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, we have the window display showing the character in all of her glory. Now, surprisingly, I think the first thing you'll notice about the figure when you get her out of the packaging is the hair, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but it adds a tremendous weight to this figure. So this figure feels quite hefty, and that's all because they've moulded and sculpted the hair in a solid plastic, and because she has quite a lot of hair, it tends to unevenly distribute the weight, and it definitely causes her some issues when it comes to balancing. It's very difficult to get her to stand up without falling over. Now, the head sculpt itself is actually very nicely rendered. I think they've done a really nice job of the Scarlet Witch here compared to some of the other characters like, say, Jean Grey or Rogue, who definitely had some issues around the eyes in particular. Here, they've done a very nice job. Everything looks evenly proportioned, and the finer sculpting around the eyes, the nose and the lips are all very nicely done, and the paint apps are really well applied, so this looks very presentable. It looks quite lifelike, and they've done a very nice job of the presentation overall. I even think they've sculpted a really nice headpiece, hat, tiara, I'm not quite sure what you call it, but the red pointy things on the top of the head. I think they've done a really good job of this. This looks really good. The only problem is that they've made the choice to give her moulded plastic hair. Now, this is an odd choice, definitely an experiment from Toy Biz here, because all of the other female characters, and even some of the men, had real doll's hair, and that's definitely something in the line that can be very hit or very miss. There are certainly really bad examples, Jean Grey being a really good example of the hair going wrong. In that sense, it just looked quite wild all over the place. It didn't look very authentic, and it just ruined what was otherwise a pretty nice figure. But here with this figure, you kind of have the opposite problem, because the hair, and there's a lot of it, is a very heavy plastic material. It doesn't look very natural, it doesn't look very authentic, it looks very shiny, there's no wash really running through it, so it doesn't look the best it could be, and ultimately it definitely causes some problems for articulation, as we'll see in a moment, but also it definitely unevenly distributes the weight and causes a lot of issues for balance. So if you want to put this figure on display, you're going to need a stand, or you're going to need to be very creative and patient. Now, for the most part, she is in that purple body stocking. This looks really authentic. It looks like the lycra they wear in the comics, so that works fine. They've opted to give it that faux leather for the main bodice and the gloves, the gauntlets. That looks pretty good as well. Although there is always the caveat with that faux leather in that over time it will crack, it will fade, it will come away and become quite crusty, so you have to be very careful how you maintain them. So it does look very nice when they're quite new, and if you look after them, it does look good, but definitely if you're going to be posing these figures over time, it will degrade. But probably most striking is her cape, because they've done a really nice job of this. This is surprisingly luxurious. It's very, very thick. On the outside, it's a nice felt material. On the inside, it has a silky red lining, which is very nicely done, and overall it feels very nice. It's got a lovely texture, it has a nice thick quality to it overall, and it does really enhance this figure and makes it look very presentable and very striking. They've given her the standard female hands, which are open hands. This works really well for this character. Of course, they are moulded in the red plastic. This looks much better. It's much more in proportion with the rest of the figure. I really like this approach. And of course, they give her those faux leather gauntlets as well, which I think look pretty natural. The shading of the red seems to work well with each other. It doesn't look too obvious that there's different materials. And overall, this looks pretty decent. And we can see the same methodology has been applied to the boots. We have that faux leather upper portion of the boot that wraps round the plastic foot to give it more balance. The foot obviously is moulded with that heel, so again, it can be a little bit precarious for balancing, although they do put quite a big surface area on the front of the foot to help her balance. But as I said, with the hair, she's always going to topple backwards. Now, she does have the standard articulation scheme as we've seen in other figures in this line, but I really wanted to highlight just how restrictive that solid hair piece is. She can just about turn her head from side to side, but as you can see, those long strands there definitely cause a little bit of resistance, and while she can kind of wobble her head from side to side, she can't really look up or down. Now, she does have the ball jointed shoulders, and there's no issues here whatsoever. They can reach right the way up and right the way back, which is absolutely fantastic. She also has that single jointed elbow, so she can bend her lower arm to about 90 degrees. There's a pin swivel at the wrist, so the wrist can rotate 360 degrees, and of course it can hinge forwards and backwards as well, a really healthy distance, which is great. Now, there is a ball joint in the waist of the figure, so that will allow the figure to move from side to side, bend forwards and backwards, and wobble and lean left to right as well. But I do want to highlight the issues with the faux leather that I mentioned before. As you can see, when you twist the figure from side to side, you can see all those cracks form, and of course, the more you do this, the worse they become over time. Now, she also has the hinge of the hips, so she can kick her legs out to the side, she can kick them forwards, which is great, and she can get them back a little bit as well. There's another single jointed knee, so she can kick her leg right the way back, and then there's another pin swivel at the ankle. All in all, I have really mixed feelings when it comes to the Scarlet Witch. I think the actual presentation of this figure is very nice. I think they put a fair amount of effort into this character, and I think the overall effect is pretty good. The only thing that really let it down, in my opinion, is that hair. And it's such a shame, because I think that you're trying to correct an earlier issue that it just didn't quite work. Perhaps if the hair had been more hollow, perhaps if it had a wash running through it to make it look a bit more textured, it might have worked a bit better. But as it is, it just obviously unbalances this figure quite literally, and then overall it just compromises the look a little bit in terms of what you can do for posability. But all of that having been said, I do really like the presentation of this figure. I really love that cape, and I think the look is pretty much spot on. I think they've done a very nice job of it. So next up we have the Vision, and again I think they've done a wonderful job of the presentation of the front of this packaging. Really nice image of the Vision up front and centre. We have the soul gem there sparkling, which looks really, really nice, and interestingly, although completely unsurprisingly, they've gone for issue number 57 of the Avengers. Of course, the Vision's first appearance. This is a really very famous cover, so it makes total sense they would use this character. However, what's really interesting is the fact that they've recoloured it so it matches his costume in the box, because the original cover was all done through this red sepia tone, so it's really interesting to see that. Now, the back of the box sadly just has that advert for the mail away exclusive Aunt May figure. By now, you'll know my thoughts on that, so I won't go on about it. And once again, when we open up the gatefold flap there, we have two lovely images that we've seen elsewhere on the packaging, that bio about the Vision, which is great, and of course that display window. Although sadly, you can't see that much of the figure itself because he is obscured by his cloak. Now, if you like your toys bright and colourful, you are gonna love the Vision, because he's so bright, it almost smacks you in the face. There's such a wonderful vibrancy about the colours on this costume, and it works an absolute treat. The head sculpt is quite nicely rendered, although it does feel a little bit too elongated, thin and narrow for my liking, but overall they've done a very nice job of it. Certainly the paint apps are excellent, a really vivid bright red there, the soul gem obviously nice and bright and colourful, and the green, it all works together very nicely, and it's nice that they've used a different shade of red for the actual eyes as well, so it makes them stand out and look a bit more vivid, which is cool. Again, he has that lycra body stocking, which works very nicely. Another vibrant green colour, which works really nice, contrasts lovely against that lemon yellow, which is brilliant. The diamond on his chest is obviously painted in as a transfer, so over time this may become worn and flake off, so be careful with that, but it looks very, very nice when it's fresh out of the box. And you'll notice as well that his little belt is sewn into the costume. It's a separate cloth piece, which I think is a nice touch. Really glad they didn't opt to paint this in or give him that sort of faux leather effect. This works much better as cotton. And overall, he enjoys a much thinner, narrower, more realistic body type as well, which works really very, very well. Some of the bigger body types that we see on Thor and Captain America maybe might be a little bit too muscular, too inappropriate at times, so having this narrower form works much better for the Vision. Looks really, really nice and in proportion, and thankfully, mercifully, they've opted to give him the plastic hands, which they've moulded in that yellow plastic, and give him the faux leather gauntlets. This looks really good, again much better in terms of proportion. Although, disappointingly, they have given those big chunky rubber boots, which just really don't work, which is a real shame. I wish they'd just give him the faux leather shoes. That would have worked a lot better than these, because these really stick out like a sore thumb once you notice them. They just look quite incongruous with the rest of the figure. Just really disrupts the proportions of the figure. But that said, he has been given a fantastic cloak. I love this. The collar is really thick and high, maybe a little bit too big, but nevertheless I think it's very dramatic and it looks really cool. And they've given him so much material for that cape that you can wrap this right the way around him or fling it back, and it's a bit stretchy, a bit elastic, and there's plenty of opportunities to strike some dynamic poses with this. So all in all, he's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. For me, there's a couple of little niggles, the boots, and maybe the head sculpt could be done have been reshaped just slightly, but all in all, I think this is a really nice figure, a really nice addition to the Avengers line. He's bright, he's colourful, he's got a fantastic cape, and I think overall his proportions are really nice. I think he's quite balanced and he looks pretty good. And I think as a pair, these figures look very nice together. They complement each other quite nicely in terms of the colour spectrum that we see here. They're quite striking and visually appealing when you put them on the shelf, on display. They look really nice together, and I think they are a very welcome addition to this line. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.